All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another Future Focused, where we are helping you stay 10 steps ahead at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. This is, if the backstage and pre-meetings have been any indication of the conversation that we are going to have, I think you are in for a real treat with this one. So I'm joined by Dave Burrill, who's the managing director of Bridging Business with IT, which I absolutely love because, again, we're really talking about that intersection of where technology meets business, meets the people that make it all happen. And the topic of the day today, we're really going to be talking about some of the ethical and moral things that we should be taking into consideration as we do this. It's so easy with business to think it's all about money, and with tech, it's all about the technology and the data. And really, there's something underneath that makes a big difference, and it matters, and it shouldn't be absent from the conversation. Or, as many digital transformations have found out, you will reap the rewards of the seeds that you sow. So, Dave, thanks so much for joining me.
No problem. I'm completely looking forward to this.
All right. Well, we're going to have some fun. But for people, I've gotten the chance to know you over our past few interactions, but others who listen or will end up watching this, they may not. And so, Dave, for those who may not know who you are, give me a little bit of background into your story, your journey to where you are today, because really that bridging business and IT, I like to think of that as like, it's almost like speaking two different languages, and bringing that together is not something that a lot of people have, but it's a really important skill. So was that something that just back in your early days, that was just natural for you, or how did you get where you are?
I wouldn't say that it was natural, but it was always kind of an interest.
Okay.
And it evolved. I mean, it would be, completely disingenuous to suggest that I planned this. I just kind of stumbled from, one fortuitous event into the next, I think, in an awful lot of ways. So in terms of background, I just start with college because that actually had an input. I worked my way through school as a contractor.
Okay.
So,
like when you say contractor, do you mean contractor like corporate? Okay. Which is, you know what? Here's another point of mutual connection. I worked my way through college building golf courses as a construction. So I have kind of that contractor background too.
Yeah. Commercial and industrial construction. I mean, that's how I got through.
Okay, so very different from technology. There's technology involved, but not the path.
No, but very germane to where I think we're going to wind up in this conversation. When you build things, you kind of plan what you're going to build before you build them. It's the darndest concept, right?
I mean, it's kind of an important concept. I can't imagine how successful the golf courses we would have built would have been had we not had the blueprints for the hole layouts and the grades and all the other things.
Yeah, hey, let's just wing it and see how it turns out. Right?
Let's just start taking down trees and see what happens.
Yeah, you don't, and it's funny, you don't put up refineries or food processing plants that way either. You're somebody who spent an awful lot of time up front figuring out exactly what you're going to do before you do it. So anyhow, 40 hours a week for 4 years doing that. Well, I did 2 degrees in 4 years in psychology and economics at the University of California at Irvine.
Okay.
So
even still, it wasn't, so economics and psychology. Right. So you still hadn't even started delving into the technical space yet, or was that kind of the genesis of where it started?
No, I'd taken a programming class as a junior in high school, and talking about being old, this was on punch tape and punch cards, right? Where we were going from my high school to the local university, TDP 11. And it was just kind of cool what you could do with a program, right? So figured that, this isn't going away anytime soon. So I took some more programming classes for my degrees and just got more and more into it. After graduation, worked for 1 more year in construction to save up some more money. Applied to and somehow got accepted to a doctoral program in organizational behavior at USC, which at the time had the #2 program in the nation. My focus was on organization systems design, and talk about insanely lucky breaks. The guy that was my boss and mentor became the first chief learning officer in the world for Jack Welch at GE. So, really early on, I got steeped in a lot of the Six Sigma continuous learning and all of the methodology that would make GE so famous under Welch.
Yeah. But
So
you also, what's interesting about your journey though, and it's always fascinating when I talk to guests about their journey, I think sometimes people have this idea of people who end up in technical fields have this very specific stereotypical background. But I think it's really interesting hearing how you brought the economics, so kind of this business economic side of things, the psychology, the organizational design, so really the people side of it, and then also, hey, while the punch cards may not be the way we do programming anymore, the underlying thesis of how computer science works is still there. And so you really had a similar trifecta to how you brought those things together.
right. So yeah, I was evolving in all this stuff, and I got all the courses work out of the way, and then realized I had another 5 years of abject poverty to write a dissertation. So also realized that abject poverty really sucks. So left the doctoral program, but at this guy's advice, his name was Steve Kerr. And Steve went on after Jack Welch left GE. Steve became the CLO for Goldman Sachs, working for Hank Paulson before Hank went over to Treasury under Bush. So Steve's recommendation to me was, at that point, I thought for a career, and I'm at the ripe old age of 25, 26, something like this. His point was, go to one of the big eight. At the time, there were still the big eight accounting firms. He said, become an auditor. He said, because if you want to be a CIO or a VP of IT, he said, the very best place to understand how a system works, how an organization works, is auditing it.
Yeah.
So
it's like doing an autopsy of the business in many regards.
That's exactly it.
That's exactly what you're doing. You're just going in and deconstructing this whole thing.
And you see how all the different pieces ebb and flow, how they interact with each other, which was it was really like a medical residency for a physician.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways.
I can see that. It's a different flavor, but it's the exact kind of thing where it's like, well, yeah, I can completely see that. It was great, sound, sage advice, to say the least.
It really was, and I didn't get it at the time. I mean, and I hated being an accountant. I mean, hated in capital neon letters. Couldn't stand it, but it was a great, great education, and got certified as a CPA. Never wanted to be one, just wanted to know how to talk to one. Jumped to the consulting practice, and then got married and was billing 100 hours a week, which unfortunately is not an exaggeration. And then was on the road every single week, flying out Monday, flying home Friday night. My wife got pregnant 3 months into our marriage. So by the time the baby was due, who arrived 1 week before our first anniversary, I got the ultimatum: it's me or the job, right? So easy decision. Went to a startup that was at first revenue, that grew them to 275 million in revenue in the next 4 years. Took them public. It was on Fortune's list of the 100 fastest growing companies in the US. And reported to the CEO/chairman and CFO. Kind of now would be, the title is more director of strategic initiatives. So
that makes sense. Because I was actually going to ask, because the IT, the digital sphere of business, it's been on quite a revolutionary journey over the past few decades. I mean, before it was kind of in the ethosphere, and then all of a sudden it was like almost a core engine of the business, a core piston in the business of like figuring all this stuff out. So I have to imagine, as you got into that space, you saw that start to shift. Because even I look at it now, like most companies, even 5-10 years ago, it used to be, well, you had to have a digital component of your business. And I would almost say now, if you're a business, you're a digital business in many regards. It's almost kind of become that trajectory.
I think you're dead on. I mean, in the old days, 20 years ago, let's say, you could be a contractor, for instance. You could be a residential contractor, just remodeling kitchens. Now, the amount of digital framework or software that they wind up using in their jobs is ridiculous. Everything from prototyping what the layout's going to be to contracting electronically, electronic signatures, payment plans. I mean, everything else. You're right. You are dead on. You used to be able to be a railroad or a lumber yard or
Yeah.
whatever. And now you're not. You are in the digital business.
Well, and
You
I feel like even in the early days, even when you were, it was starting to evolve, digital was seen as like just this kind of like subcomponent that you had your business, and then there was the digital piece that maybe kind of enabled certain parts of it. And then over the last few decades, it's just become a point where it's like, well, it is so integrated, to your point, regardless of what you do, that it's like, well, you're a digital business no matter what.
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, it started with a general ledger, with the accounting system, right? That was kind of the
Yep.
very first thing that people got into. And then that naturally migrated over to pick up payroll systems. And then people came along with the idea of, let's handle your manufacturing and supply chain, right? So, and then it just kind of mushroomed from there. The whole CRM space really only got going about 25 years ago with
Yeah.
Siebel. I mean, that's when it became big. And then Siebel, who had left Oracle, was acquired by Oracle and went back. So yeah, it's just a completely different ballgame. And I think that leads to a larger issue, that the technology has outstripped the thinking of the people in the business, right?
Okay.
So one of the greatest fallacies that we deal with all the time is everybody calls these IT projects. They are not IT projects. They are
No,
business
they're not.
projects that just happened to be enabled by technology,
Yeah.
right? The only people who understand the business are the business people. But the second you call it an IT project, those business people, they check off in their mind, hey, it's not my responsibility, it's IT's,
Yeah.
right?
Which I think it just goes back to that evolution of how technology has so become
Right,
the air we breathe
right,
in business, that we haven't necessarily made that jump in terms of adapting the whole, I guess, the human side of it to that point. Because before it was like, oh, this is an IT project, and you were talking about implementing some sort of server, project type of a thing, where a business person was like, I don't really know. You were talking more of the hardware behind the
right,
scenes type stuff, versus
right.
now it's like, well, no, you're talking about critical infrastructure that your business actually runs on. You can't just have IT in the background mapping that out in a
Right.
silo and then bringing a solution to you. But many organizations still treat it that way.
Invariably, that's almost a knee-jerk response. And the second that they do that, in a way, they've condemned their project to failure, because you've done two things right off the bat. You've given the business people license to abrogate all responsibility for the
Right.
project, right? I mean, so again, not my problem, it's IT's.
Yeah.
But IT doesn't know what you know. They can't. There's no such thing as well, maybe somebody out there is clairvoyant, but I'm not one of them, right? I can't read anybody's minds, and I do not know how
No.
to do the Vulcan mind meld. So I am not going to be able to figure out what they know unless they tell me.
Yeah.
Right? It's basic blocking. What is it that you want?
Yeah.
And what is it that you need to do? If the business doesn't step up and do that and take an active role in explaining it, you're toast. But the flip side of that equation is, as soon as you call it an IT project, you actually put on the technical staff responsibility for making decisions that they are not equipped to make. And they don't
Yeah.
realize that they're not equipped to make it. They don't know what
No. And I
to ask.
And I think, one of the things that I've seen, and I've been in a lot of big organizations where kind of the process is very legacy, where you see a lot of this stuff where it's like, well, we did requirements gathering.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not, I get what it's trying to accomplish. And I think in the days of yore, that may have been able to get you enough information to be able to make some of the decisions that you needed to make and make things successful. But I think, to your point, now a lot of that requirements gathering that's being done is not happening at the degree of intimacy that is required for a digital project to be successful.
We've had a fundamental misunderstanding as to any human's ability to communicate.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've only really learned, neuroscientists and cognitive psychologists have only picked up on. And here's where my academia side comes back in. I've spent the last 4 years digging into this stuff, because I couldn't figure out how so many smart people were making so many stupid mistakes. And now I think I have an understanding as to what's going on. Since Aristotle or Socrates, we've thought that we were masters of our own mental domain. We thought that we were in control of what we remembered and what we said and what we did. And we've learned in the last 20 years that's not the case. We don't have anywhere near the command of our mental faculties that we thought we did. And one of the greatest ironies of it all is that there's this process that we've come to realize about how expertise is acquired. So the very first people that the technical team always turns to when they walk into an engagement is, I want to talk to the SME. I want to talk to the subject matter expert, right?
Yeah.
Because this is the oracle that's going to tell us everything we need to know. Well, what we've learned about expertise is there's a paradox to it. The more of an expert you become, the more detail you internalize and the more information you forget.
Okay.
Which is, think about that. The more of an expert you become, the more detail you internalize and the more you forget. So what winds up happening for those that have any interest in this is when you first learn a skill, all of the information is processed up right behind your forehead, your prefrontal cortex. Your brain is a computer. It runs on power, processing, and storage. And when you're actively thinking through all of the stuff, like you're learning to play guitar or piano or any, right? You're thinking about all of that stuff in the front of your mind, and it's sucking up a lot of juice, a lot of power, a lot of storage, a lot of processing. Well, there's kind of a ghost in your machine. We have a bit of an operating system that handles in a lights out fashion 95, 97% of everything that our body does, of everything our brain does.
Yep.
Well, that operating system realizes that we're spending a lot of time learning something, sucking up a lot of resources, so it decides to make us more efficient. And it transfers the processing of that information from the prefrontal cortex at the highest human part of your brain down to the lowest lizard portion of your brain, the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. So it lays down these dedicated neural circuits, literally like a circuit on a chip, that hard codes the knowledge that you had. Now, the advantage of that is that you can do everything really lights out.
Which I think you see with things where, like, as somebody becomes an expert, you aren't necessarily actively engaging in these things. They just become this auto response where it's just like, I just know what I need to do. And it's your brain being efficient. It's like, yep, you know what you need to do. So we're just going to move this down to the level where you're not actively thinking anymore. And you're just doing.
But here's the paradox and here's the irony. So the SME that we turn to has got everything so automated in his brain that he does it lights out.
Yep.
The problem is he only remembers about 5 to 7 he or she only remembers about 5 to 7 things of their entire process. It's a very summarized story, and everything else they've forgotten. So when the tech guy goes to do business requirements, or the business analyst, the project manager, whoever it does, and they ask the SME what you did, the SMEs respond, oh, you do this and this and this, and that's it. And the techie goes, it's that easy?
Anybody who's done like a process mapping session
has seen it.
I guarantee anybody who watches, you can relate to this, where you're like, okay, we pulled all the SMEs together and we've got this massive, complicated global process. So let's put the sticky notes on the board and map this thing out. And there's like 8. And
yeah, like, that's it.
No, I know there's more happening.
But they're telling you, no, that's it. That's all there is to it.
That's all we do. Yep.
So the poor tech team goes away and a month later, they've coded everything they think they've been told to code. They present it to the business, and the business looks at them and goes, what's this?
Yeah.
This doesn't have this, and this. Well, you didn't tell me that. Well, you should have known.
Or worse, it doesn't even get caught there and it goes into implementation. And then all of a sudden people go, well, why isn't it doing this? And you're like, why isn't it doing, how would I have known it needed to do that? You didn't tell me that. Well, we always do that. And you're like, it wasn't one of the 8 sticky notes.
When you talk about it like this, it's downright comical.
It is. It's not funny when you're in the middle of it. When you reflect back on it, you can laugh a little bit.
It's a lot like the Abbott and Costello Who's on First skit.
Yeah.
Did you ever see that?
Oh, I've seen it.
I mean, for those who don't know what we're talking about and who don't know who Abbott and Costello are, go to YouTube and just pull up.
Yeah,
Abbott
look it up.
Who's on First.
You'll get a good laugh out of it.
And you'll figure it out, and then you'll know exactly what we're talking about. But the irony of this whole mess is that we keep doing this. And then to fix the problem, we do more of the same, which just digs us into a
let's
deep
just pull in
hole.
more SMEs. We just need more SMEs. Let's just get more of the SMEs in the room to do it. And now you've got 8 conflicting Post-it notes.
Yeah, because they've only remembered their significant piece of the story. Everything else has been left out. Yeah, so it's not like that could create any problems at all. But I think, getting to the issue of ethical behavior and the way we do this, our knee-jerk response is always to blame somebody.
Yes.
Either business blames the IT people when people don't do what we think they should do, or they do what we think they shouldn't. The human knee-jerk is to assume malice.
Yes.
Right?
Assume the worst. And you see this, I have seen this completely annihilate corporate cultures. Like I've seen this just destroy functional cultures and make people, because what we just described, you do that so many times, it rips your soul out. You just start to go, what am I doing here? I'm working as hard as I possibly can only to get thrown under the bus when this stuff happens. And I'm doing the very best that I can, but you don't even realize. And it's completely demoralizing for people.
We ought to dig into that a lot more, because it's not just demoralizing. The stress that you place on the people is horrific. One of the reasons that I started digging into this stuff is that I've got, I think the count's now 11 colleagues that never made it to 60. And all of these people there was one of the 11 that was obese. Everybody else was in pretty good shape. 45% of these people died of deep vein thromboses that broke loose and went into pulmonary embolisms from long hours of sitting, right? So there's this culture in IT of the hero. We don't really call it that way, but there is an archetype of the engineer that works 4 days straight, sitting behind his desk, living on Red Bull and the occasional slice of pizza.
Who doesn't sleep. And actually I think of some big tech companies that actually really emphasize that as this is the culture. Like you come work here, you sleep at your desk. We give you all the snacks that you need and make sure you don't ever have to go anywhere so that you can just commit to the insanity that we just described.
Right. Yeah. I'm not going to name the company, but this is a true story. I know of one organization that actually provided adult diapers.
Wow.
Stupid beyond belief, right? Because, hey, that works when you're 23. It doesn't work when you're 40.
No.
It doesn't work at all. I have actually got a neighbor who was of that class who had a massive stroke at 25 and is now pretty much wheelchair ridden and can barely talk. Now,
and
when we talk about this is unethical.
Well, that's just it. And I think one of the things about it is, I think of stories of friends that I've had in IT where just unreasonable deadlines, just chaotic things, again, where it's like, we have to do this, but for all the crazy reasons we just described, the expectations that it places on people it's unsustainable. And it actually is it's completely crushing. It's completely crushing for the people who are involved in this stuff.
So when you hear about people being burned out, there's no wonder they're burned out.
For sure.
And the joke, and again, if you step back from it, you almost have to laugh because it's so stupid. These problems aren't that big. It's not like this is rocket science. All you need to do is kind of go back to what we did as contractors in construction, map out what you want to build on an iterative basis. Like if you're doing a golf course, you didn't build out every last bit of the golf course all at once. You got the fairways graded, right? You did the basics and then you build out from there. You do an iterative approach where you don't try and specify the
No.
next 10 years worth
And
of
even if you
development.
had the blueprint, you ran into the unexpected and you adjusted and you pivoted based on this. We moved the bunker from the left side of the green to the right side because once we got into it, we realized after we actually saw this layout,
Right.
it didn't make sense anymore.
So you adapt. But you go into it knowing that you're going to adapt, and you go into it
Yes.
knowing that you're going to iterate and you're going to do one phase at a time. You're
Yep.
not trying to boil the entire ocean.
You know, what's interesting about this, though, that I think ties back to this ethical side of this and the debilitating component is that I personally have seen, growing up in a funeral home, I've seen people that have just pursued this stuff to the end, and whether they made it to the old age or not, they crushed it. And for what? And so for me, I'm always like, I don't care if it's successful or not. It's not worth it to give yourself into these things. But one of the things that comes out in some of these digital transformation efforts is all these really negative outcomes that we just described happen. And then the success rate of these digital transformations is dismal. So you look at what we put people through, what you put an organization through, and you don't even get to the other side of that and go, yeah, it was really horrible, but we nailed it. We shot to the moon and we landed and it was amazing. And you're like, you put people through all that only to have it go down in flames and then have everybody pointing the fingers at each other. And you're like, so it's not even like we're saying, hey, this is really bad for people, but we know you're trying to make money or be successful as a company, so be less successful. It's like, well, no, it's like lose-lose across the board.
There's this guy, Bent Flybridge, who is a professor of large projects at Oxford. And he's one of the, you know about him, we've talked about him in the past. He's he's probably the world's leading expert on large projects. And he's done a lot of research on IT projects with McKinsey. He's not just focused on IT, but the things that he found along these lines with failure rates, that just for all projects across the board, 1 out of 5 are smoking craters, total write-off, dumpster fires, right? 2.5 out of 5 are just way over budget, way behind schedule, way under deliver. If the project's over $1 million, the failure rate, the smoking crater dumpster fire jumps to 1 in 3. The way over budget is almost 2 out of 3. Genuine, something that approximates success, is about 1 in 20. And the one that he came up with that I love the most is that the odds of it going so bad, it threatens to bankrupt your organization. This is for an IT project, a business project that happens to be enabled by technology. The odds of it going so badly it threatens to bankrupt your business are 1 in 6. So let that sink in. It's like playing Russian roulette with the life of your business to take on a $1 million project, right? So,
well, and I think talking about that helps bring some of this stuff to light because, I care deeply about people. And I think that's why I got into the field I did, because I look at this stuff and I watch the way many decisions are made, many organizations go, and it's often at the expense of people, under this belief that, well, by doing it, by somehow exploiting people's capability, we'll somehow be more successful. But the data you just shared right there shows that
it's not.
Everybody's losing at this. You're crushing the people, you're destroying their livelihoods, and you're actually their lives. Their lives, and you're playing Russian roulette with your business. So to me, I've always struggled with like, what where do we go wrong with this stuff, and what can we do about it? Because I think one of the challenges I run into a lot, and I'm curious your take, having done this for some time, is there is this, and I feel like AI has only accelerated this. There's this pressure to just constantly go faster, do more. We just have to keep accelerating, keep going. And what we just described, the secret to doing this well is to actually slow down and to actually say, hey, be thoughtful and plan this stuff out. And that can be a very difficult conversation when you have people who are amygdala hijacked, like just thinking like, we got to get this across the finish line. And you're trying to go, I understand that that's what you're thinking, but I'm telling you, you're going to kill your employees to get there. And you're playing Russian roulette, not just with this project, but with the viability of the company.
So Flybridge talks about it in terms of think slow, act fast. So his whole point is think through what you need to do, prototype it, storyboard it, process maps, when you're in the context of technology, right? Come up with a visual that everybody can see and understand. And that visual is the paper printout of a process map or a storyboard, right?
Okay.
Those artifacts are the bridge between business and IT, right? Those are that is the physical bridge, because those are the things that everybody, regardless of your technical background or prowess or understanding, can get. So whether you're the AR clerk or the payroll clerk or whatever it is, or the CIO, you understand those diagrams. If you just put a bunch of words on paper, we can't assimilate it. We can't create it. The beauty of those types of artifacts is that what we fail to realize is that everybody's mind's eye is different. And that's okay. Two people can be discussing the same thing using exactly the same terms and visualize something completely different. But when you put a picture in front of them, right? When you put a picture in front of them and they go, oh, I didn't realize that went there. I thought you meant it went over here. No, right? It's the thing that I've used with a lot of CFOs, and for some unknown, it's always a CFO that just says, got to get it done fast, right? Yeah. They're worried about costs, so they want to just bulldoze ahead and just get it done quick, and they don't want to waste their time doing any of this planning stuff because that's not work. That actually is work. Planning, real planning, isn't filling out a risk register or a stakeholder register. Real planning is coming up with a prototype of the solution so that you know what you're going to do before you're going to build it. It makes all the difference in the world. You get everybody on the same page before you try and construct something. So the argument that I've made to CFOs, which seems to work, and to even CEOs, is that, guys, have you ever remodeled a house? Have you ever remodeled a bathroom or a kitchen? Right? Have you ever built a house? No one in their right mind would do that unless you had first spent weeks, months with an architect.
You wouldn't go to Home Depot and just buy a whole bunch of lumber and sheetrock and throw it in your driveway and be like, I don't know, like, let's just start putting stuff up and seeing where it goes.
You sure wouldn't hire a contractor and said, build me a house unless you knew what the plans look like, right? No, and that you can see. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be yelling and get animated, but I just get
you're fine. I get people who listen to my show know how animated I get in stuff, so they know to keep their volume turned down.
I start to foam at the mouth at some of this stuff because it's like you can see a house, right? You wouldn't make a dog house unless you first had the plans for the thing. You can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it. Everybody can. So why in the name of God, when it comes to something that you can't see, you can't touch, you can't feel it, all of a sudden, hey, we don't need to worry about this planning nonsense. Let's just make it up as we go along.
Though, something you hit on here, though, that I think is really important for people who are thinking about this is that, and I think this is where sometimes things fall apart, because especially as companies have gotten larger and more complex, you have so many more people involved in things. And it's not that, because and I've run into this where people sometimes get defensive where they're like, I do have a plan. And I'm like, you have a plan in your head that you can see.
Right.
But there's 100 other people involved in this project and they're not in your head.
They can't ever be.
And they can't ever be, to your point. And so we've got to get that out and somewhere so that we've got other people. And then going back to your point of the way our brains work, that plan in your head 100% has gaps, because there's a lot of things that have gone into homeostasis where it's just kind of like cruise control that you're not thinking about. And when we actually get that plan out there, we're going to have these other people looking at it going, do you realize you didn't put any bathrooms in your house? I noticed that you didn't put in a water heater and a central ventilation system. Like, how are you going to, oh yeah, well, I guess I just did. And that whole series is, people tend to get defensive about like, well, but I do have a plan. But I think going back to your earlier point, this recognition that, right, but your plan is incomplete, which is why we got to get everybody together, and nobody else on the team can see what's going through your head.
They can't get it. I mean, that's the beauty of a drawing. Yeah, that's the beauty of a storyboard. Everybody can look at the same thing and go, oh, I get it. That's what you're thinking. That's what you meant. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard like, oh, that's what you meant. Right? I mean, when the light bulbs start to flip on and then they realize, oh man, we've been talking about two totally different things.
Yeah.
It just, we need to step back, realize that we all think differently, realize that our brain doesn't operate the way we thought it did, realize that everybody's in exactly the same boat. So the thing that you're accusing the other guy of, you're doing too. Right? You're missing too. And that's a little bit of a humbling moment when, particularly when the CEOs or the CFOs, where it is sometimes delicately, sometimes not so delicately brought to their attention that, they've wasted a year and a half and $2 million because they fired a $2 million cruise missile and nobody ever bothered to define the target. Now they can't figure out why they haven't hit it.
Yeah.
And that happens all the time. But you need to be able to deconstruct that argument for them and say, here's all the things you missed. These are all the things that you never communicated. So don't be blaming the technologist for it. And that kind of, there's a caveat.
Well, and I think there is, and I think going back to the point of kind of the themes that we were bringing out of this, it was kind of the like ethical case of doing this is, we're talking about the fact that this can be difficult to do, but again, it requires a degree of humility to go, you don't have all the answers.
Right.
And I don't have all the answers. And actually having a bunch of people together that all think exactly the same way actually is not a good thing. Not only is it not good for, I can show you plenty of research about the benefits of diversity in thought and diversity just around the board, what that brings to a conversation from the health of an organization and the well-being of your employees. But even what you just described there, the ethical case for why do you do this? Well, it's because if everybody in the room sees and thinks exactly the same way, those 8 Post-it notes are missing a whole lot of things, and you're not going to actually hit the target.
Years ago, early in my marriage, I couldn't understand why my wife was using language differently from me.
Okay.
And a particularly wise marriage counselor who wound up becoming a very, very good friend of mine, kind of hit me over the head. And his exact quote, this guy was a dual PhD, psychology and theology, and he was an ordained Presbyterian minister. So there was a little vulgarity in his statement, but it was brilliant. So I will apologize to anybody with sensitive ears in advance. He said, Dave, the thing that makes you so fascinating, you're so brilliant in some areas and so totally fucked up in others. It was like, and I cracked up. It's like, well, how can I argue with that? Right. Yeah. He said, what you're missing is that your wife is speaking a different language, but English and French are completely different languages. They're structured differently. They're both perfectly valid languages.
Yeah.
We tend, and this is one, if there is a tremendous failing of males, right, in society, it's that the male view has long been advocated as the only view. And in a lot of cases, it's been the white male view has been advocated as the only view. What we have utterly failed to realize, and people aren't doing a very good job of articulating this even to today, and thankfully this counselor was able to hit me over the head with this, is you're not the only language being spoken. And as opposed to being mad at other people because they're not speaking your language, you might consider the fact that their other language is allowing them to see and perceive things that you cannot.
Yep.
And when you listen to those voices, you have a much richer whole, because the whole is far more complete. And those people are actually the greatest asset that you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Right? Your wife is the greatest compliment to your way of thinking that you could possibly imagine. You've been looking at her as an antagonist
Your
when in reality,
adversary. Right. You've been looking at her as
you're
a barrier or an adversary to what you're trying to accomplish, instead of seeing, hey, you're the missing puzzle pieces.
exactly. This is the thing I need to be more complete. And unfortunately, in business, we've had that same idea.
Yes.
We've often defaulted to that same way of thinking. We are particularly horrid with the people that hold the purse strings to IT, which is usually the CFO. Yeah, it's being a great accountant is not being a great technologist. And more and more CIOs report to CEOs, but there's still an enormous number of them that report to CFOs.
Okay.
Right? And that migration is happening. And so is and the role of the CIO is changing. But we've got to have CIOs that are capable of articulating that migration of thought, right?
Yeah. Well, and who actually believe it. I think that's one of the things, a lot of the content that I create is really trying to help people understand that this isn't me just trying to make a moral case for this because Christopher Lynn believes this is the right way to do it. It's
There's
the
dollars and
data
cents behind it.
shows.
Yeah.
The data shows this is a more effective way to get there. And you know, I appreciate you sharing the example with you and your wife, because like, I mean, I'm married. I've dealt with the same things where I'm like, this is getting in the way of me getting done what I'm trying to do. And instead of going, yes, I know, and it's because I'm seeing something that you're not. And if you would slow down long enough to listen to me, you would understand that. And when I've actually done that and gone, and it goes back to what we've been saying the whole time. It's a win-win.
Right.
In those situations, my wife feels validated. She feels heard. She feels listened to. And I don't step into a pothole and break my leg because she's like, yeah, I know you're in a hurry to go get the mail, but could you maybe slip on some shoes because it just iced over outside? And you're like, huh? So, I mean, some of these things are such common sense, but it's so hard sometimes to get over ourselves because these things that seem like barriers are actually the things that can make this stuff successful.
The tragedy is business schools aren't teaching this.
They are not.
Engineering programs aren't teaching it. Right? So all of these people come in knowing what they know. And we've got, human beings have this nasty habit of viewing the capacities and the worth of other people based upon whether they see in them that which they value in themselves. Right?
Yes.
So years ago, Price Waterhouse was horrible at thinking that there was value to anybody other than a CPA. Right? You had to be an auditor, you had to be a CPA. If you weren't, you were scum, which is a ridiculous philosophy, right? But it takes a long time for people to sort of break out of that thinking. Now, I think to PW's credit, I think they've come a long way of migrating past that. But we've all got to get past that. We've all got to embrace this idea that it's not just a matter of picking up. DEI is under a lot of assault right now.
It is.
In many ways, rightfully so. Right? You can't just pick people for the color of their skin or their gender or identification. Competency still counts. It really counts. It's important. It's something that you got to focus on. But we've got to find that balance between saying voices that looked different than we did have got value to bring to the table. There's something of tremendous value to bring to the table. So we've got to learn how to accept that and be willing to live with the ambiguity that may not figure it all out immediately, but it's a whole lot bigger to hash it out on a piece of paper so that you win or lose on a piece of paper before you win or lose in real life when you try and go back and fix it later. Right?
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
and some of the things you're hitting on that I think, again, it's just a fundamental, and this is where so many of the conversations I engage in that are like business priorities or technology priorities, it's like, but we're dealing with people.
right.
And so we're actually dealing with people challenges that we have to work through on a lot of these different things where we're going, yeah, but I mean, yeah, even if you get the right technology and it's the people that are running the technology. So if you don't take that into consideration, it's not going to work anyway on any of this stuff. And going back to the different voices, the different perspectives, maybe it's just me, but like in life, I've learned through the school of hard knocks that if the world was all just like me, it'd be a terrible place. Even though like there's a part of you that's like, wouldn't things just be so much easier if everybody thought and acted like I did? But I've seen what happens when that plays out. And I go, yeah, on paper, that may sound good for about this long, but then you let that clip play out for about 30 seconds and you go, oh no. Like all of a sudden, all these other things come out. But to your point, I think that is not reinforced in people enough that it's like, no, actually, it wouldn't be better if everybody saw things the way you did. And those potential barriers you're seeing are actually saving you from yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I'm not going to identify who this is because I'm not trying to call out anybody or blame, shame, or disparage anyone.
Yeah.
But there is a leader of the agile space. And not to say all leaders of the agile space or the agile movement think this way, but one has made statements, I don't know about publicly, but I know privately, that the business doesn't have any idea what they need. The business people are clueless. That's a very dangerous position.
Very dangerous.
It's also very flawed because what it does is it immediately telegraphs two things. It shows how arrogant you are to believe that you are more omniscient than somebody who's been doing a job for 20 years. To think that you can know something in 2 hours or 2 days that somebody's been working at for 20 years is just delusional, right?
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a messiah complex, thinking that you know everything that there is to know. The other thing that is telegraphs is you have absolutely no idea what questions you need to ask to draw out the right information.
Right.
So in twofold, you're communicating your arrogance and your ignorance. These people do know what it is that they need to do. They just know it so well, they've internalized it, and you don't know how to get that out of them.
Right.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a humbling moment.
It is.
Did you ever see the movie Sully? About
I might have.
Captain Sullenberger, the Miracle on the Hudson and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So the movie was a great illustration of this, but they didn't really call out what was happening as part of the film. So, Sully's flying the plane. They have the birds strike right after takeoff, and both engines flame out, right? So they did allude to this. He immediately took over control of the aircraft. So the co-pilot had the plane. Sully takes over control of the aircraft. Very first thing he does is switch on the APUs, the auxiliary power units, so that he's got control of the flight surfaces as he's dealing with this glider while they're trying to restart the plane. That happened to be number 17 on the checklist in the event of a flameout. Sully did it number 1. So for months, this guy's under scrutiny by the airlines, by the FAA, by everybody scrutinizing him, saying, you didn't do it right. You didn't follow the checklist. Had you done what we prescribed, you would have been fine. His whole life, his whole career, all of his finances are on the line. And this guy can't unpack and explain what he did until Airbus and the FAA ran all these simulations and realized he did the only thing he could have done in the proper sequence that would have saved everybody on the plane. Had he followed the checklist, he would have crashed.
Yeah.
So this guy knew it so well. He'd internalized it so deeply, he couldn't get it out to save his own skin. He couldn't make that argument. It had to be proven over time with all of these different, basically research models going at it, trying to understand what had happened. That same thing exists in business all the time.
Yeah.
But we're operating.
Go for it.
Just to finish, we're operating under this fallacy that humans are able to articulate everything we know. They can't.
Yes. No.
They can't. We're not built that way. We
Yeah.
are hostage to a whole series of forces that we never dreamed we were hostage of. From an evolutionary perspective, all that mattered were the 5 to 7 things of the story that we remember. The
Yeah.
tiger's close, it has big teeth, it will eat you, run like hell. Get away. That's all that mattered, right?
Right.
You didn't care how much the tiger weighed, you didn't care how long it was, you didn't care how many whiskers it had. Comparable things like that are critical to every IT project you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Right? 150 years ago, the toughest thing we had to deal with was hooking Betsy up to the wagon.
Right.
Right?
And that's just it. The complexity of these things
As
has
exploded.
scaled exponentially. And yet in many ways, we're still trying to operate off an outdated approach to this. And, I think one of the things, especially in Western, I would say maybe it's just business though, because I think business has really adopted kind of a Western cultural component where in many ways celebrates this just rugged individualism of
The
the
hero.
hero that can figure it all out on their own, can do it, has all the answers, and nails the target 9 times out of 10. And when it is a miss, it was just because somebody else moved the target type of a thing, instead of recognizing that's not reality.
Right.
Especially, it maybe was reality when you were hooking Betsy up to plow, and it was like, okay, I just need to plow like this. But it's like when you're running a multi-global or a global multinational IT project, trying to understand how to transform a business process that's run 365 different ways based on cultures, languages, these other things, to think like, yeah, Jill or Ben, who's our CIO, is going to be the one to come in and tell everybody how it is and fix this. It's not realistic, and it destroys not only the organization but the people around it.
A couple of years ago, I interviewed the guy that was the head director of digital transformation for Nestle when they took the entire company worldwide and they got them off all of their different platforms, and there were 150 plus platforms, and they put them all into one. The first time they tried to do it, they tried to move everybody to SAP, and they were following the technology first, right? So they were going to apply SAP's technology to whatever Nestle did. Scores of millions of dollars spent, utter disaster.
It didn't work on the first try. Oh, weird.
No, funny the way that worked. Well, their CEO, who I can't remember the guy's name now, but I mean, a pretty good visionary, came back at it the second time. He said, okay, we're going to do this again, but now we're going to focus on business excellence. It's going to be business first. Business is going to lead the charge, and we're going to adapt the technology to the business, not the other way around. So the very first thing they did was designate process gurus and I think it was like 34 main processes like payroll, AP, AR, inventory management, all the rest, right? So they took the time to storyboard and process map out all of their main processes. They brought together players from all over the world and figured out what's the optimal process for this business. So payroll at Nestle is done the same way worldwide. You can have different parameters that get plugged in for
Sure.
tax tables and the rest of the stuff, but it's done the same way worldwide. So's AP, so's AR. They went from 100 and some odd, 120 data centers to 4. Think about this, right? They got these 34 processes in place. It took them like 4 years to do it. But their failover capability now is unbelievable.
Oh, I'm sure.
If the hurricane takes out the Philippines, Germany can process payroll. They haven't lost anything, right?
Yep.
They went from needing an army of analysts to tell them how many Kit Kats they sold at Kmart. It would take 6 months, 6 to 8 months to be able to do it with 20 people. They can now do it in half a second.
Yeah.
Right?
I
Because
believe it.
they've been able to lay all of this stuff out, and they put the business first. But they did it by building the process maps and storyboards and then adapted the technology to the business and not the other way around. So organizations like that have seen insane value and I know, Chubb's Insurance is another one that's doing it like that. They've seen insane value by figuring out the business process first and getting everybody on that same page, bringing an entire team together so that all of the stakeholders have a voice and figure out what they need to do. Amazon didn't get to where they are without doing that same sort of thing.
No,
right?
you
And
don't
now
scale to that size.
Yeah, and now they're a juggernaut.
Yep.
And people.
Well, what's interesting about the stories that you told, though, 3 things stood out to me on this that I think tie back to this theme of like, I guarantee if you were to pulse or talk to the people involved in that, and I have no doubt there's still, I mean, what we're talking about, doing this right, doesn't mean it doesn't have its challenges. It still has its challenges. It's not like it's, rainbows and puppies the whole time you're going through it. So for the employees, I'm sure there were stressful days and things like this, but I just think of like the example you gave with Nestle. And let's say a hurricane takes out one of the centers, and you think about the impact that could have if things didn't go the way they would now based on this new updated thing, the absolute chaos and stress that would put on the teams involved in that,
right?
The chaos and stress it would put on the employees who didn't get paid, which with the economic situation that people are in right now, for a lot of people, if you miss a paycheck, that's it. Like you're in some major trouble, and the impact that can have on people. But what it took, and some of the things you highlighted in there, is one, they made mistakes. And I think in businesses, we need to accept that fact that it's like, you're going to make some mistakes along the way, going back to why you do it in iterations and in sprints to be able to say, hey, let's fail fast, let's fail small, rather than get all the way to the finish line only to have the whole thing blow up.
Start with the MVP and build out from there. Yeah. Keep going.
And then you talked about the time it took. This didn't happen. They didn't change this in Q1. We started this in January. Let's get this done by Q2. They took the time to do that. And I think those are 2 really important call outs for these things that have big implications with really huge rewards on the end side of this for both the business and the people involved.
Right. I think the other reality is, the surprise is, if you know what you need to build, you can do it pretty fast.
Yes.
Right? If you know exactly what you're trying to do, you do it pretty fast. But the key is, do it in iterative chunks. Get the minimum in place, right? Just the bare minimum that you know you need, and then build it out as long as there's a business case that warrants building it out.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point to emphasize, is the fact that I do see that where sometimes there is this resistance to slow down because there's this idea that you're still operating under the old kind of waterfall approach where it's like, oh, we're going to slow down and then it's going to push this 18-month project to 3 years. And you're like, well, no, we're just going to do this in smaller chunks. So we're going to slow down, but then we're going to go quick. Then we're going to slow down, then we're going to go quick again. And you end up actually moving faster overall.
Yeah, the SEALs have got I think I told you in the past, I spent about 20 years of my career working with 2 vice admirals. And the SEALs have got this saying, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Great line, right? They know what they're going to do before they do it.
Yeah.
They plan meticulously. When they went in to get bin Laden, I don't know if
I was going to say, I don't think they just like dropped him in and were like, hey guys.
They built a full compound mock-up of the place before they ever went into it. They'd rehearsed for weeks. They knew exactly how they were going to assault. When the first Black Hawk went down because it got caught in the rotor wash of the other one and it crashed, McChrystal, I think it was the Admiral McChrystal, I believe I'm getting his name right, said, no, we're going that contingency. They didn't lose it. They didn't lose a beat. They'd already planned for the contingency and kept going. Yeah. Right. There's that famous photo of Obama where he looks like he's about to stroke out in the Situation Room, and you can't blame the guy. That's when the helicopter was crashing. Right. Now we got it. Right. So there's nothing wrong with being purposeful in your planning exercise, provided you're not just filling out a form. You're actually prototyping what your solution needs to look like. And I've been rambling on and on and on.
No, but I think the piece that we can kind of close, because we could probably do like a half day, just Rogan-esque style conversation on this. Cause I think it's a huge topic. It's costing companies billions of dollars a year. and it's costing people their health and their livelihood on this stuff. This is a serious problem that we need to focus on. But I think your point that you just made at the end there, that is a really important one, is it's about doing it the right way. It's not just like, oh yeah, let's do the planning. Well, okay, but you can do planning, and I've seen planning be a giant waste of time because you weren't actually planning the right way.
Right.
Or, let's slow down. Well, I've seen people have analysis paralysis, and slow just meant they couldn't make a decision and couldn't move anything forward. So I think one of the key messages I want to reinforce to people is our advice here, and I think that's pretty clear through what we've talked about, is not just move really slow, take any idea regardless of whatever, and any plan is a good plan. It's like, well, no, that's not what we're getting at. But those key components are often missing.
I think if there's a phrase I'd want people to remember, it's planning is not filling out a document. Planning is prototyping. Planning is only prototyping. It's prototyping the solution. In this context, it's process maps and it's storyboards. Do we have like 2 minutes?
Yeah, for sure.
I'd like to share one.
It's my show. We have as much time as we need, but
thank you. Some people need to cut off properly, but there was this thing. There's this professor of neuroscience at Stanford named Robert Sapolsky, who looks like this hippie at Berkeley in the 60s. Very mangy hair, very mangy beard. You wouldn't think the guy's a neuroscientist until he opens his mouth. He's obviously brilliant. But one of his books is called Behave, which is basically explaining the biological underpinnings of human behavior. And at the end of the 750-page book, which, I mean, to his credit, he takes a very dense and difficult topic and makes it eminently approachable. He's got chapter titles like Adolescence or Dude, What Happened to My Frontal Cortex? I mean, really, great book. But at the end of it, he credits this story that one of his postdocs found that just hit me like a arrow between the eyes. He said in 1487, there were 2 Dominican friars out of Germany that wrote a book called Hammer of the Witches. And the idea of the book was how you spot and deal with a witch. So this is shortly after the last big plague rolled through Europe, shortly after the Gutenberg printing press had come out. So behind the Bible was one of the most widely distributed and read books throughout Europe. So the way that you identified a witch is if they had a seizure, because the Gospels all talked about Jesus casting out demons from people that were epileptic or having seizures, right? So that was ironclad proof that you were in league with Satan, because the only way you'd have a seizure is if you were demonically possessed. Therefore, you must be a witch. Okay, so that's not great, but the way that you dealt with the witch was to burn them alive at the stake. So pretty horrifying, right? But historians estimate that there's something like 150,000 to 1 million people, and I think 1 million is probably a far stretch, over the next 200 years that were burned alive at the stake because of this book.
Yep.
Now, today we hear that and are horrified by it, because we all know somebody who's epileptic or somebody who's had a neurological condition or a tumor or whatever, and they've had a seizure. And to think of torturing them, burning them alive is horrific, right? You take your keys away from an epileptic because you wouldn't want them to have a grand mal seizure on the freeway, right? But you're not doing it to punish them. You're doing it with guardrails around a process that nobody can control, right? So that's something that happened 500 years ago. Now go back 50, 75 years in the past. And when a kid couldn't read in school, they were stupid, lazy, incorrigible. They were labeled by their teacher. That whole thing, we assign malice or we jump to malice. It's something we assume the worst. Now we know there's this thing called dyslexia. The kids couldn't process information the way that other people did. And I think I mentioned this to you before. This is near and dear to my heart because my daughter's got a special form of it. And we discovered it just as she was going into 2nd grade. She'd had coping mechanisms at first and she could bluff her way through. But after that, it just, it was too much. Text became more difficult. Once again, you give her tools, you put coping mechanisms in place, guardrails to deal with something that nobody can control, right? Yeah. These kids aren't stupid. They're not lazy. They're not incorrigible. They're not any of the bad things that we assign to them. So you fast forward today, the same sort of stuff is going on in these IT projects. Again, business projects that happen to be enabled by technology. It happens every single day.
Yeah.
And we're applying the same sort of standards: stupid, lazy, incorrigible, malicious, right? None of the above.
Right.
There's something going on with the human brain that we formerly have not understood. We need
Yep.
to change the way that we engage that problem, because continuing to do it the way that we are doing it now, this ends with where we began, is unethical. It's
Yes.
immoral. It's wrong.
Yes.
We've got to.
And you're losing as a business.
Yeah.
It's
And,
costing you billions of dollars. Like
yeah,
it's a both and.
everybody loses by
Everybody
doing it the way that
loses.
we continue to do it. And the joke is, it's not rocket science to fix it. It's incredibly
No.
simple.
Yes.
So, stop letting dogma rule the day, whether you're waterfall or agile or, whatever. And if the sales guy from the software company said it was going to be easy, politely said, he underestimated the severity or the difficulty of the challenge, right? There are less gracious ways to summarize that.
Yes.
But get over it, right? There
Yep.
are ways to fix this. So,
yes. No, and I think, again, I really have enjoyed our conversation, and I hope,
me too.
this encourages and inspires people, because, again, when you get these things right, we've laid out the case for why, the damage that can come from doing it wrong. We've highlighted the things you can do to change course. But I think the inspiration at the end is, when you get this right, everybody wins.
Yeah.
The people are in a better place. The end users are in a better place. The business is in a better place. So there's no reason not to do it. And yeah, I just appreciate you making the time and sharing your
Oh,
wisdom and experience on this, because we're not, the train has left the station. We're not going to become less digital. We're not
right.
going to move. This isn't going, we're not going to go backwards. We're only going to go forward. And so I think getting this right is critical to the success of business moving forward, but also the people who these businesses run on. So thank you so much for making the time.
I can't thank you enough for having me. This has been an absolute blast. I mean, I've loved the conversation.
Awesome.
And
Awesome. Well, go for it.
well,
Finish
hey,
your concluding thoughts.
it's not just the business. It's not just the people. It's our society.
It is.
This is a
It's
core
society as a
competency
whole.
for America.
Yes.
We need to
And
get this right.
yep, I 100% agree. So thank you, Dave, for joining me. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. I hope this has challenged you, inspired you, whatever it is, we can do better. We can do better, and it's not as hard as we sometimes think it is. So with that, I will leave you all with that, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we will see you on the other side.